first reading is from Genesis 18, 1 to 10. The Lord appeared to Abraham by the oaks of Mamre, and as he sat at the entrance of his tent in the heat of the day, he looked up and saw 3 men standing near him. When he saw them, he ran from the tent entrance to meet them and bowed down to the ground. He said, "My Lord, if I find favor with you, do not pass by your servant. Let a little water be brought and wash your feet, and rest yourselves under the tree. Let me bring a little bread that you may refresh yourselves, and after that you may pass on. Since you have come to the servant," so they said, Do as you have said. And Abraham hastened into the tent to Sarah and said, "Make ready quickly 3 measures of choice flour, knead it and make cakes." Abraham ran to the herd and took a calf, tender and good, and gave it to the servant, who hastened to prepare it. Then he took curds and milk and the calf that he had prepared and set it before them. And he stood by them under the tree while they ate. They said to him, "Where is your wife Sarah?" And he said, "There in the tent." Then one said, "I will surely return to you in due season, and your wife Sarah will have a son." And Sarah was listening at the tent entrance behind him. Now Abram and Sarah were old, advanced in age, and it had ceased to be with Sarah after the manner of women. So Sarah laughed to herself, saying, "After I have grown old and my husband is old, shall I have pleasure?" The Lord said to Abraham, "Why did Sarah laugh and say, 'Shall I indeed bear a child now that I am old?' Is anything too wonderful for the Lord? At the set time I will return to you in due season, and Sarah shall have a son." But Sarah denied, laughing. "I did not laugh, for she was afraid." He said, "Oh yes, you did laugh." Then the men set out from there and they looked towards Sodom, and Abraham went with them to set them on their way. The Lord said, "Shall I hide from Abraham what I am about to do, seeing that Abraham shall become a great and mighty nation, and all the nations of the earth shall be blessed in him." Word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
The second reading, Colossians 1:15 through 23. Christ is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of all creation. For in him all things in heaven and on earth were created, things visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or rulers or powers. All things have been created through him and for him. He himself is before all things, and in him all things hold together. He is the head of the body, the church. He is the beginning, the firstborn from the dead, so that he might come to have first place in everything. For in him all the fullness of God was pleased to dwell, and through him God was pleased to reconcile to himself all things, whether on earth or in heaven, by making peace through the blood of his cross. And you who were once estranged and hostile in mind, doing evil deeds, he has now reconciled in his fleshy body through death, so as to present you holy and blameless and irreproachable before him, provided that you continue securely established and steadfast in the faith without shifting, from the hope promised by the gospel that you heard, which has been proclaimed to every creature under heaven. The word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
Please stand as you're able for the reading of the gospel. Before us now, the Holy Gospel according to St. Luke. We continue the 10th chapter. Now, as Jesus and his followers went on their way, he entered a certain village where a woman named Martha welcomed Jesus into her home. Martha had a sister named Mary. Mary sat at the Lord's feet and listened to what he was saying. But Martha was distracted by her many tasks. So she came to Jesus and asked him, "Lord, do you not care that my sister has left me to do all the work by myself? Tell her then to help me." But the Lord answered her, "Martha, Martha, you are worried and distracted by many things. There is need of only one thing. Mary has chosen the better part, which will not be taken away from her." The Gospel of our Lord.
Praise to you, O Christ.
Congregation may be seated. It was many years ago, probably not to this very day, but and not quite 50 years ago. I know we're all very excited about what happened about 50 years ago. At least nostalgia has overcome many of us for 50 years ago, but not quite 50 years ago. I was maybe 14, maybe 13 when this happened. We lived in North Carolina, and the pastor made a special visit to the house. And he greeted my brother and I, and then he talked with my mother and father, and he asked a favor. Would you be willing to host a dinner for the bishop and his wife? Oh, and I will come too, along with my wife. As I overheard this, I thought, oh my goodness, this will be interesting to hear, because my mother will not possibly be able to say no to such a request. She didn't. She said quite enthusiastically yes. And I thought, what kind of amazing transformation, because I already knew what kind of transformation mealtime was when there was company. I mean, it wasn't a matter of pulling up an extra chair to the table. It was a matter of, well, moving into the dining room. I mean, we weren't allowed to walk in the dining room. We were allowed to walk by it, but not look too carefully. We were allowed to walk by the dining room, but to seat at the dining room table, oh my. It would be interesting to me whether we used the regular dishes or whether the special dishes would come out of that cupboard, and how rare a thing it was that the crystal would come out of the cabinet. Ooh. I was looking forward to seeing what this would be. Now, my mother, who prepares marvelous meals, well, I should speak historically about that. Now she eats marvelous meals out all the time. Sometimes she goes to the styrofoam buffet. You know, the one in the refrigerator? But she prepared the most marvelous of meals. She would. Oh, when there was company, there was always at least one more thing that was special. And I knew pastors were special. So I knew the game would be at top level. What about a bishop? Oh my goodness, what will this be? I could not wait to find out. Well, the bishop came. There were many days of getting ready, but my mother was quite cheerful about all of that. It's maybe surprising, maybe not so, that she was cheerful about it. Usually when she is busy about something, you're just kind of bothering her and leave her alone. But But she was happy about all of these things. The table was stretched out. I got to hold one end while she pulled the other end out. It was stretched out, not for one leaf, but for two. And that tablecloth that I had only seen in storage, this one was brought out over to the ironing board, onto the table, sweeping across the vast plains of 8 setting places. My goodness. Of course, the candlesticks were all new. We had a big pile of used candlesticks. They were only down maybe an inch. But what they were being saved for, I didn't really know. Everything matched. The crystal came out. The plates were put at the table. My brother and I, this was the time that we were definitely not to be in the dining room. All of these things had to be handled with the greatest of care. And at 14 and 12, my brother and I were chief suspects of anything broken in the house. The bishop and his wife and the pastor and his wife arrived to great fanfare. The bishop is, as you would expect, a towering man, collared up, a man who was born and bred to wear a pectoral cross. Must have been 10 pounds hanging from his neck, with a deep booming voice that made all of us mortals quake and tremble. After all, how else do you get to be a bishop? Nobody said that. The pastor was there with his wife. He seemed oddly nervous. For me, all the pressure was on my mother. I was interested to watch how she would react to this game time, shall we say. But she was cheerful and pleasant. My father, absolutely standard, even steadiness. The meal was beautiful. It even contained a surprise. You see, the story had preceded the bishop that this bishop, don't count on it for all bishops, this bishop liked buttermilk. Very cold buttermilk. My mother found a way to chill the buttermilk beyond what the refrigerator's capacity was, and she presented it to him as the meal was served. Oh, it was received warmly. The stories were told. Everything happened at the meal. It seems that when you get 2 pastors together, well, actually, I know from personal experience that you only need 1 pastor in the room, and one of the main topics of discussion is length of sermon. When there are 2, it almost seems to be a feast about, well, it's like a fish story, you know? First liar doesn't stand a chance. Everything was just fabulous. I felt like I was doing anthropology. The culture had shifted for how hospitality was to be done. The meal came to an end, the conversation hit just that little bit of lull. You know, that little bit of lull where it's time to move on to the dessert phase, right? You know what I'm talking about. And my mother rose from the table and she picked up her plate. And my father said, it's quite a privilege. My father said, "Young Bill, why don't you give your mother a hand?" You know what I did, don't you? Young Bill, give your mother a hand? You could not receive a greater straight line. I'm 14 years old. You already know I'm a smart aleck. Oh, the laughter was much louder than that. It was very deep. But I also knew I had one opportunity. I had used it, and now it was time to stand and begin removing dishes from the table. So before any laughter had died, before anybody could make the comment, I was already at the task. My brother was not invited to do so. I found it interesting that for as formal as this dinner was, the other two women at the table also rose and began clearing dishes. Into the kitchen we went. Turns out the men had important business to discuss. Well, my father was known as a big giver, and the bishop had a special ask, and all of those things happened in my brother's presence while I was moving dishes in and out to the kitchen. You might have pictured a little bit of sibling rivalry going on. Oh yes, there was a little bit of that happening between my brother and I. He felt like he got to be with the men, while I was with the women. You see the roles that just automatically seem to just divvy up. Where and how they got there, I don't know. But there they were. Dessert, of course, was served. It was recognized, the hospitality, the generosity. And I noticed my mother was by far and away more happy after this meal, which was substantially more work than any I had seen her serve in a long time. So it is that this text would come up. Martha and Mary. I have noticed that people who serve the best are the ones that have the deep heart for serving. I noticed this probably first with my grandmother, who would prepare enormous meals when her son and his wife and her grandsons would visit. Quite often it was pork chops, sometimes it was breaded veal, which ought to remind us of Abraham serving the guests who come across the desert plain. Abraham and Sarah and the other servants that work for Abraham. The very notion of hospitality, absolutely critical for survival. Abraham knows this because he and his group are nomads. They travel between all of these different kingdoms. You can take your bulletin home, look up this text, and lean back a few chapters, and you can read about how 3 kings gang up on 5 kings, and how all the kings in all their different territories wind up fighting a war together and against each other, and how Lot is captured and Abraham comes to his rescue with 318 trained men of his own. This is no small operation that Abraham has been going on, and he knows all of these people, everybody in the territory. He owns none of this land, but he moves his herds through all of these lands, and they are welcomed guests, and he knows that he is a host who welcomes. So when the three strangers show, he serves with hustle and haste. I mean, as Mark read it, we heard how diligent he was about that serving. He rouses Sarah to make the cakes, even gives her the recipe. I used to think that that was rather clever, but really what he is saying is use the choicest of flours, not just the regular flour, but the very best. And he's calling for the very best of the meat and curds. Curds don't come easy in the desert. Curds and milk and all things brought and made and served, and then he stands at the ready. Almost like a Downton Abbey episode, isn't it? So we can't possibly say that being a servant and hosting and being hospitable in the way that Martha is trying to be. We can't say that this is unprecedented in Scripture. Indeed, in 12 chapters, Jesus will be describing to his own disciples as he institutes the Lord's Supper. His disciples will have a dispute one among another, like siblings, like my brother and I, like Martha and Mary. Who's doing the right thing? And he will interrupt them, saying it will not be so like among you. Well, this isn't the hidden away foot washing in John. This is right there in Luke. And he says to them, but with you, the greatest among you must become like the youngest, and the leader like one who serves. For who is greater, the one who is at the table or the one who serves? Is it not the one who is at the table? Yet I am among you as one who serves. He reminds them that they will be like this because they have stood beside him in all trials. And yet, when the trial comes, they will only be in the shadows. And when he dies on the cross, they won't be seen. Still, he will use all things. Still, the servant is the posture to be received. So how is it that Mary had chosen the better part? Mary, who, in the picture on the cover of our bulletins, is there kneeling at Jesus' feet. This is no place for her. Because kneeling at Jesus' feet is a disciple's position. And here is a woman kneeling at his feet, taking on the role of the disciple. Is it that she is breaking the custom, the standard? Is it that she has a sibling rivalry also? Is it that she chooses not to hustle and be disturbed? Quite frankly, can you blame Martha? No. It's very difficult to say that Martha is short of help. It's very difficult. Imagine travelers from Galilee, party of 13, suddenly in your home. Do you have enough leaves in your table? Is there enough room there? Is that power and authority? Is that respect that is due because Jesus' name precedes him? How many of those disciples helped? How many others participated with Martha? Did Martha have a staff of servants to call to? And what will be the blessing of this hospitality? Martha's sense of duty, her sense of her role, is a pure sense. It is the distractions that Jesus is pointing out to her that have led her away from, well, we just heard it last week. All your heart, all your soul, all your strength, and all your mind. There's nothing wrong with Martha choosing a different role. Having the role of serving at the table. What is the needful thing? Well, if you don't feed the people, they get up and leave, don't they? The opportunity to listen and hear is always there, isn't it? Take a moment and hear how God calls us out of the roles that we build for ourselves. Maybe it's with our culture. Maybe it's with our family history. Maybe it's time to be able to make a shift from a chore and a task to a genuine sense of hospitality. Inviting Jesus into the very living and loving of our lives. And saying it really does center on the one needful thing. The properness and the rightness of the relationship that God is dying to bring to us. That God is rising that we might have new life. That God is present and hosting us. Amen.
Amen.
Let's stand and sing our hymn of the day.